Hey, everybody. Welcome to a very special episode of drumb Drummer. I'm Dan Riley, and with me, as always, is my partner in crime, Chuck Dalba. Say hello, Chuck.
Hello, Chuck.
Tonight's episode is one that we've been looking forward to for a very long time. A guy who was responsible for a number of drummers in their formative years. Guys got their first kits from him, and throughout their playing careers, got their gear and really kind of just hung out there. And it was really instrumental to a lot of people. Rob Biernbaum, the founder of Drum Headquarters. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my extreme pleasure to welcome one of our favorites, Mr. Rob Biernbaum. Give it up for Rob.
Yes.
How are you?
Good.
Rob, it's good to see you. I haven't seen you in a long time. I'm digging the COVID lettuce. You're looking good there. It's looking strong.
It's back to the future for me.
I'm loving it. I'm loving it. So Rob, we're really thankful that you joined us. We started this as kind of a way to connect the drumming community that it's a tight group. They're a bunch of great guys, and they like to kind of fellowship with each other. And COVID just kind of knocked this out. So we thought maybe doing this video thing would kind of bring them together a little bit, or just kind of let them learn a little bit about each other. But it took us so long to get this thing off the ground. We're almost through it now. So we're a dollar late, and a day late and a dollar short. But we're really thankful that you're here. Can you tell me what got you started in drums? Where you started?
Well, I planned to be a pitcher for the Cardinals, but then February 9th, 1964 happened.
What was February 12th, 1964?
The first time the Beatles appeared on American television. That changed the world for millions. It actually changed the world for non-musicians, but that was a real a line in the sand, so to speak.
So you threw the glove away and picked up a pair of drumsticks?
I kind of stayed with it. I was told not to try out for the team in 10th grade because of the length of my hair.
Is that right?
I eventually ended up on the team, but no, drumming had taken over. I was playing in bands from 7th grade on.
So anybody that we would know?
Considering it was 1965, probably not.
I mean, anybody that kept through, No,
not really. But
okay.
I played in a lot of bands, but I soon realized I was kind of a half-assed drummer. So I went to college, and then I went to graduate school, and I worked in research for 5 years. And then I kind of had that epiphany that a bad day around drums was better than a good day doing research. So I jettisoned that career and opened Drum Headquarters.
Tell us about that a little.
Well, to go back, when I was in college, I worked at a store called Mr. Drums. It was on Old Natural Bridge, west of Lindbergh, and he opened in 72. So probably a little bit before Fred Pierce, a couple years before Fred. And so I worked there in my senior year of college, and I learned what to do and I learned what not to do in business. So I quit in June of 75 to go to grad school, and then they went out of business later, that fall of 75, a few months later. Not because I left, but I mean, it was.
I was going to say, without you, they fell apart.
But it was in the back of my head. But I, went to grad school, got my master's, got a job, started working in research, and then I started teaching at Ken Mazzina's drum shop on Olive in Creve Coeur, west of Lindbergh. And so I thought, well, I had this deep in the back of my mind that I kept pushing away, that I'd open a drum shop, but then Ken opened up. But then I got to know Ken, who was a great guy and a great player. And I realized that, first of all, he was right on top of Fred geographically.
Yeah.
It's in Overland. He was in Creve Coeur. It made no sense. This is so far pre-internet that location really, really mattered. So after about a year there is when I decided to quit my job, and I got a map of St. Louis, and I got push pins, and I stuck a push pin where every drum shop, which was 2, and then every full line music store with strong drum departments, because that was a thing back then. Dale's Music had a strong drum department. Tower Grove had a strong drum department. And all of a sudden it jumped out at me, south of Highway 40, centrally located, which also made it close to the clubs, close to the venues, close to the auditoriums. I thought this is the neighborhood that I need to be. So that's when I found that first tiny location on Big Bend near Highway 40, like 600 square feet.
Yeah, that was a tiny place. That was near Dale Avenue, wasn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, it was a house that was converted for retail, and my wife had a professional job as a counselor, and she was dabbling in collectible LPs, mainly collectible for people in St. Louis before they were called Keishi Classics. When I found this house, I mean, it was crazy. You guys were too young, maybe. I don't know if you're ever in that store.
I was there
once. There one time.
I was there once. Yeah.
I mean, it was like you walk in and there was like a room that I guess was a living room and a dining room. And then there was a little hall. So there was an extra room, like maybe 150 square feet, maybe 100 square feet. And so I told Sherry, just put your records in there. And she kept her full-time job. I quit my job, and I was like bouncing back and forth like a ping pong ball, selling records, trying to sell drums. I mean, there wasn't enough business at the time that it was really much of a problem, but it got a little bit out of hand. So that was kind of the genesis of Drum Headquarters.
So what year was that?
Opened January 81.
January of 81. And then how soon before you moved to the Manchester location that we all remember?
The first Maplewood location was on Sutton and Manchester in a strip of stores right on the street. And behind it was Kmart, which is where Schnucks is now. So I moved in August of 84. So that was 3.75 years. But after a year, I needed to move because we all know from the drums you have in your houses, they take up too damn much space.
Yes, they do.
So
especially when they're set up.
Yeah, so we moved to this strip of stores that was built in the 70s. You know, Maplewood was like one of these shopping meccas in the 50s and 60s. And then it died off when malls came in. So it was desolate in Maplewood when we moved there. In fact, the space we moved into was built in the 70s. We moved in 84, and we were the first tenant. The floor was still gravel.
Oh, wow.
Or they had to pour the concrete floor.
Wow.
Wow.
So Sherry moved first, but she moved to another house down the street on Big Bend. And then I moved to Maplewood. And then we had some issues with making noise with the neighbor. We had lessons, we had people trying stuff out, but then Kenny Aronoff came to the store one day, and it only took one of his monster flams, and we had an accountant next door, so that was an interesting story. But I expanded into the accountant space, and then Sherry moved into the space next door, and so we had kind of a little corner there, and we could do our thing without interfering with anybody.
So tell me about 1984. Were you basically fighting off drum companies that wanted you to sell their stuff, or did you have to?
Well, no. I mean, in the very beginning, I couldn't get any lines. The only line I could get was CB 700, which everybody could get, which it's just it was marketed by a major company, but it was marketed by C. Bruno, but it was made by different manufacturers overseas. It was more like just a private label brand. And then Gretsch, but Gretsch was, at the time, not desirable, inconsistent, and had a lot of problems. So then then Slingerland also I could get, because Slingerland was distributed by St. Louis Music at the time, and Slingerland was somewhat on a decline. But my sole goal was to get Tama. And it took 6 months. I got the line in June at the first NAMM show I ever went to in June of 81, but they wouldn't ship anything until September. They had to kind of smooth some things out in the market. I couldn't get Pearl and I couldn't get Yamaha.
let me ask you about Tammy. You mentioned the NAMM show. Is that how all that went down? You went there and
I started calling the Tama rep early on, let's say maybe February, a month after opening. Let me back up for a second. Tama sold their hardware to any dealer through one or two distributors around the country. So we were selling Tama hardware, but we weren't buying it from Hoshino, Tama's US division. But I was able to show him invoices and proof that we were selling the heck out of this hardware. It was crazy at the time. First of all, it was in super demand and deals weren't the way they became. So to get the best deal, you had to buy 240 pieces of hardware. I'm not talking hi-hat clutches and lugs. I'm talking cymbal stands, hi-hat stands, bass pedals, thrones.
Was that Titan stuff?
Yeah, Titan and Mercury single braced, and then an aluminum Spartan. But there was like a small discount at 60 pieces, a bigger discount at 120, and a master discount at 240. So
that's quite a commitment.
It was crazy. Well, I never bought 240, but I shared it with a dealer in Florida. We convinced the distributor without letting Hoshino know that they were splitting the order in half, and we got 120, which was still a hell of a lot to bite off.
Right.
And Resurrection Drums in Florida got 120 pieces. And we did that on a semi-regular basis. And I just kept in touch with the rep and built a relationship with them. There was a very strong Tama dealer way up in North County, Griffin Music. And Fred was selling Tama, and there was probably a couple others. We eventually got it. And in fairly short order, we became their top dealer, probably in the state eventually.
So how did you get to have your own line of sticks, heads, even drums?
Well, that came much later. I mean, that wasn't really that much of a deal. I mean, Vader pioneered this private label stick thing, and but they weren't the same exact models as Vader. Plus, Vader wasn't as established at the time. So, you know, I can't remember the quantities now, but it was a few hundred pairs at a time, and they would screen your name. The drum sets we really didn't get into until maybe after about 15 years, and it was really the entry level.
Okay.
By that point, I had owned HQ Percussion. I had an international sales rep who handled all of our overseas business.
So time out. Tell us about HQ Percussion, because I don't know that I knew about that.
Was it the pads? Yeah, the practice pads. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Obviously, if it has anything to do with practice, I wouldn't know about it.
Get my snare drum out so I can play the rim shots.
Boom.
In 1984, we had the iconic drum clinic with Simon Phillips and Dom Famularo. And
I was there.
I was too.
So when they offered us the clinic, which was a major thing, there was only 8 or 10 cities, and that was really exciting for us. A Japanese guy who was working in the U.S. office, who had been at the Japanese factory but brought him to U.S., called up one day, and his English was pretty good. It got much better. In fact, he still lives in the U.S. But he said, "We want to have local drummer open for Simon." And I'm thinking, local drummer? You want me to pick somebody? He goes, no, Dom Famularo. Well, he thought local drummer because Dom wasn't known, but he was on Long Island, which was, 1,000 miles away from St. Louis, but they wanted to put Dom. Dom was totally unknown. He had done hundreds of school clinics by then, but still he was unknown. He was a local guy, and they saw his potential. So, well, I said, sure, as long as it doesn't interfere with Simon's time.
Right.
He took like a deep breath, and I said, "You sound like you're like you weren't really sure." And he goes, "Nobody else wants to do it." So
nobody wanted Dom?
Yeah, they didn't know who he was. They just didn't understand. So he was relieved that I said yes. He got on the whole tour, obviously, and you know that Dom came there completely unknown, and in 5 minutes he had the audience in the palm of his hand.
Yes, he
absolutely
20 minutes
they were screaming for more.
Right.
Yeah.
So after that clinic, Mike Gerhard, rest in peace, one of our teachers said, "I got to get to know this guy." And so he started calling Dom, because we connected with Dom immediately. And he
Yeah,
said,
you were close with him for a number of years, weren't you?
With him. He said, you guys got to come to New York. You got to do this. You got to do that. So Mike really took it. And Mike flew to New York and spent a weekend with Dom taking intense lessons. And he came back with a practice pad called Power Play, a round gum rubber practice pad. And he said, you got to start stocking these practice pads because I'm going to recommend it for all my students. And Mike had 40 students at the time. So I said, $25 practice pad? And he said, yeah. I said, a $25 practice pad? And he said, and I went way back with Mike all the way to Mr. Drumm's days when he was a customer. He said, well, I can order them from Jerry, who owns Long Island Drum Center, where Dom teaches. And I go, no, I'll get them. So I ordered 3 and we sold them. And I ordered 6 and we sold them. I ordered 12 and we sold them. And a few years later, I bought the company. It was kind of like that old Remington shaver commercial. The guy goes, I like the product, so I bought the company.
First of all, before we move on to what you're doing currently, I'd really like to find out, I have these fantasies that you have these warehouses full of all these rare drums that you've kept from everyone. So can you dispel the myth for me?
I was never a collector. I'm really not that much of a collector. I'm looking here at 10 snare drums I have up on some shelves here. You know, I regret selling such cool stuff that came in the store. I can, people talk about stuff that goes through your hands. I saw you.
I have not met a drummer yet who doesn't have some regret. I'm sorry. I shouldn't say that. I should say I haven't met a drummer over the age of 35 who doesn't have regret about what they got rid of, including the end shot.
We had the very last Tama Artwood inlaid maple snare drum with the inlay. After that, they started using some kind of decal thing. We had the very last inlaid one, and we, we were in the business of selling what we bought. So we also got the last of the original bell brass.
Oh, that's the holy grail for me.
I had one. I prefer a wood snare.
Right.
Always have.
It didn't. It was like it's like so much of that stuff. It wasn't the price or the desirability wasn't necessarily commensurate with the sound or anything.
That's fair.
It didn't sound bad, but I don't know if it was that much of a difference.
Yeah, I know that it was one of the most recorded snare drums in the decade of the 80s. It was on a lot of those, especially the metal and pop rock stuff like that.
Yeah. I don't know if Bill Bruford used it, but it sure sounded like it.
It sure did. It had that distinctive bonk.
Yeah. I could probably come up with 20 mainly snare drums, some drum sets that I let slip through, but.
So I've had my eye on that kit behind you. What's that?
Well, that's the Yamaha kit I made at the Yamaha factory in Osaka, Japan.
I need to hear that story. Sorry.
It's a long story.
Okay, try and do it in 3 minutes.
Yamaha had a tradition that anytime an artist or an industry person went to the factory, they made a snare drum. So Yamaha put together a trip of 7 or 8 dealers, and we were going to go to the factory. First, we were going to go to Indonesia, where they made all the hardware and the stage custom, and then to Osaka. A couple weeks before, Dave Jewell, who's with Yamaha still, called me up and he said, "You're not going to make a snare drum like everybody else." And I said, "Well, don't worry about it, Dave. I know how much money you guys are spending to take all of us there." He goes, "No, you're going to make a drum set." I said, "What?" He said, "You're going to make a drum set, and we're going to give you a drum set and every dealer on the trip."
Oh my gosh.
Now, this was the week of September 11th, 2001. So we started in Indonesia, and we got there on September 9th. You have to really think about it because the time change is so dramatic. But we spent that Sunday doing a tour of Jakarta, and we went to the largest mosque in the world, we thought it was a parking lot out front of this beautiful building. And they told us, no, that's where the other 500,000 pray when the inside is full.
Oh, wow.
So 36 hours later, that mosque was the site of the largest anti-US rally in the world.
Oh my gosh, and you were there.
We got out of Jakarta about 9 hours early. If we had not got out on that time on a red eye to Japan, we would have been stuck in Jakarta for 30 or more days. Because once we got to Japan, we flew overnight, we landed in Tokyo, we got on a bullet train to Osaka. We went back to our hotel rooms. We got our hotel room in Osaka. We all went to, well, I thought we all went to sleep. A couple guys stayed awake and they were afraid, and they were watching the US news, which was, 9 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock in the morning after it happened. And I woke up at 8:30 and a friend of mine he woke me up and called me in the room at 8 or 7:30 or whatever, says, do you know what's going on? And I said, no. And he said, well, turn on CNN International. So I turned it on, and within 5 minutes, it's incredible how you can go from knowing nothing to having a pretty good understanding of what it was.
Yeah.
So we went down to breakfast, and all the Japanese people were there who had been with us the whole trip. And they said, your hotel in Japan is booked for an extra week. There's a hotel booked for you at LAX on the day you're supposed to return for a week, and all your families have been called. This is like 8:30 in the morning. They were up all night, and they said, we can cancel, you can do anything you want. So we said, well, can we meet privately? So the 8 of us got together, and we said, we don't know anybody in DC. We don't know anybody that we think at the World Trade Center. We don't know anybody who we think was flying through Pennsylvania. These guys spent a ton of money bringing us here. We need to go ahead, but we said, the only thing we ask is that we can watch President Bush make his speech, which was coming up at 9 o'clock and I think US time, or 8 o'clock, which would be in the morning in Japan. So they said, sure. So we went to the factory and they took us into a conference room and they had the TV. But the problem was that every word Bush said was translated into Japanese.
So you couldn't hear what Bush was saying. You could only hear the Japanese translation.
One of the Japanese Yamaha employees translated the entire speech for us.
Wow.
And the reason that I know that he didn't skip anything is when Bush said, this is the worst tragedy since Pearl Harbor. And he said those words. And as soon as he said those words, every Japanese person in that room, and there were 8 or 10 of them, turned ashen and bowed their heads and said, we are sorry.
Oh my God.
That was heavy. This was before we did anything. And we finished that whole thing. And that's when we knew we made the right decision, that we had to go ahead with the trip. First of all, we couldn't have gone anywhere. You could not fly anywhere, as you probably remember.
Yeah, they grounded everything.
We went through all that, and we kind of took all that in, and then they took us down to the factory floor, and we walked in. And previously they had asked us, what sizes do you want? What wood do you want? Whatever. We walked down to the factory floor and lined up like soldiers. They have all the plies of wood with our initials on it.
Wow.
So it's like RB, in chalk on the plies with the size and the series and all that. And then they proceeded to show us how they made shells. And then I actually made 2 of the shells on my kit.
No kidding.
Yeah, I made the snare drum shell and I made the small tom shell. And the snare drum we did complete, except obviously we didn't drill it or put on the bearing edge. That's too much of a risk. But we installed every metal part on the drum. Well, first we stained it by hand, because if you ever look at my kit, you will see that the kit is beautiful and the snare drum is very inconsistent because I was staining it by hand. So that was an incredible experience.
That is an amazing story. I'm so glad that you shared it with us. So before we move on here, I want to ask if you can share with us what you're working on now. We usually say, what you pimping? So what you pimping, Rob?
Well, because of prodding from you, Dan, and that's
prodding is a good choice of words. It's more like annoying.
You've been prodding me for years to share stories from my time in the industry and with drummers and drummers.
I was always fascinated by it.
And really, I had been collecting these stories. So I had about 20 or 25, then I had other ideas. And so a year or so ago, I actually started putting some effort in organizing them and collecting them. And I'm probably over 40 or 45 stories now. And so I've launched this Facebook page that is going to have the first posting on March 1st called Roll With It. And I will share stories from my time with HQ Percussion, Lenny White, Joe Morello, Vic Firth, Simon
Chuck Dalba, Dan Riley.
That's right. Et cetera, et cetera. A lot of them I think are funny and entertaining, but I think that most of them are also inspiring.
Well, in just in fairness, and we're going to wrap up here, but because I'm really thankful that you brought that up. So, I know that I was a pest, but you got to know, Rob, you tell those stories in kind of an anecdotal fashion, but some of those are so fascinating. And I said the same thing to you every time. You got to write a book.
I
would always say, hey, how's that book coming along? How's that book coming along? How's that book coming along? So I'm really thankful that you agreed to.
Thanks to both you guys. Both you guys helped me, and
yeah, well, we're big fans. You were very instrumental in our careers, and I remember hanging out there as a young punk. I remember going to see. I was enamored with Phil Collins' concert toms, and then I went to see Triumph, and I saw Gilmore with that Tama Kid, and I walked in and I said, "This is what I want."
I loved that. Was that? I always forget. Was that an 11 or 13 piece?
13. It was the Saturn Mega 70 plus 6B Tama and Tama Kid, and you came over and you put that thing together and tuned. It was
your brother and your mom.
It was my brother's house. My mom wouldn't have it. She was at my brother's house. I had to put him in the garage, but she finally came around. Well, Rob, I can't thank you enough for agreeing to do this.
Thank you, guys.
We love you. We appreciate you. We thank you for everything that you've done. And just know that there is a legion of drummers just like us that agree. And I know that a lot of people are going to enjoy this when it comes out. So, so thank you again for joining us.
Thanks. See you guys.